Wow, thanks a lot. Thanks for having me here, and thanks for such a great time here as well. Maybe some of you have heard the story about that airplane carrying all the Haskell programmers in the world. It was a tiny plane, like 10 people. And yeah, everybody was in that plane. The story was that if it had been going down, nobody would have noticed. That was how domain-driven design was 12, 15 years ago. And now it's like this. And not just here, but look around. It's totally amazing. I don't know what happened. I was not as involved as I am nowadays for a few years, and this happened. So maybe I should leave again and come back in 10 years again. We'll see. So I'm Jimmy. I'm from Sweden. I'm going to do my best to speak something like English here today. But I will also do some German, actually. That's outside my comfort zone, so let's see how that goes. I've been doing development for 30 years, and I used to be an Agilist, a developer, a DDDer a couple of years ago. But I think I'm more now that than ever. How many of you are developers in here? Almost all. Do we have some program managers? Nobody? Testers? Security experts? Oh, because I'm going to offend a lot of people here. And no program managers around. That's almost like cheating, isn't it? Offending people not in the room. Okay, I'm going to offend developers also, and I think that's fine since I'm a developer, so that should be okay. I consider myself as a coding architect. Anyone else thinking along those lines? I think those hybrids things are, that we've heard that a lot during those 2 days. DevOps, for example, it's a typical example. Coding architect, in my opinion, that works out perfectly. You can be an architect and write code all the time. I'm not sure about the opposite, to be honest, but that's a totally different discussion. So, this presentation is about how can we increase the possibility of having success in our initiatives, in our different projects we are working on. So during 30 years, I've collected a couple of ideas. I'm going to talk about 5 of those. I think those are the 5 most important, actually. And of course, you have other ideas. It would be super fun to talk about that afterwards. But I already have a bit of a bad feeling for keeping you here instead of having weekend. But I'm very happy to see you for 1 more hour. And we can have a quick chat, and then we can continue on email and Twitter and things. So before we go into those proposals I have collected, I'd like to show you a few different situations that to me is quite common. I could come up with many other of those, but I'm just more like trying to set the scene with those 4 examples. Let's see if you recognize any of them. So the first example is I was invited to a security workshop, only security people around, military-grade, hardcore security people wanted me to tell them how we as domain-driven designers or developers are thinking about software development. So the first question was, how do you start your projects? And I told them about a couple of my ideas around that. And they were totally shocked. They thought I was the most unresponsible person in the world. How on earth could you start a new project without doing a full-blown security assessment and information analysis from a security perspective? They couldn't understand it. They thought that was really sloppy. And I was as shocked as them. Because how can I think about that? We don't know anything yet. It's really weird to start from that perspective, I thought at least. So to me, that was like thinking about how thick shall the door be? But we haven't even thought about building a house. Maybe it was a bike. How can I start from that angle? That was really strange for me. Have you seen something like that? Sorry? That's one of the things I could talk about. Developers are doing similar things. Exactly. Yeah. I have 3 more. Next one, this is a top-level manager, maybe a CIO. He's out in town going to all the nice warehouses, buying stuff off the shelf. So he decided to buy a workflow package. We haven't decided on anything yet. Before the project, he buys that stuff. We all know you need that, don't you? So this is also, it's also like buying this really, really big agile product so you can be really agile. You need a project. So let's buy that before we have decided on anything else. I see that quite often also. CIOs seem to love to buy stuff. Someone said that before. I think it was Michael. Think along those lines. That's how C-level think also. Third observation. Now I'm down in the machine room, the data center, talking to the operations people. And we've had some friction in the past, so I think maybe I should go and have coffee with them. And I think that's a good idea. They get quite upset with me when I mention there might be a new project starting up in a couple of years from now on. Because how on earth could that be thought about without contacting them first? They need to order servers and think about SLAs and everything. I can't leave that room until I've promised they will be the first to get all the detailed information about this, as soon as something has been decided. And fourth example, and this is the project manager. A really hardcore project manager arrives to the company for helping out. And the first task that is started out, and it's taking quite a lot of time actually. It goes on for weeks. And the project manager is creating this really, really nice document structure with loads of documents. And then, well, I'm a little bit suspicious immediately, to be honest. But because nothing has been decided, what shall all those documents be about? I don't know. And I thought I was among the first to know anything here, because I'm there for being the architect. And I have a look at one of the documents, and there is some text there, but only headers, because it was only a template. So this humongous structure with headers or templates, nothing, no content at all. Have you seen that? We should have a project manager here. I feel a little bit bad joking about people who can't defend themselves. So once again, 4 different examples. They are thinking in vacuum, with their own specialization, trying to do stuff that should be useful later on, probably, they think. So it's not about evilness or anything like that. They are doing their best, and they really know their stuff. And it's not me not liking to have a super project manager. I love to work with all those people, but not in this way. And as one said here, maybe developers could be similar like this. I think several of you, including me, could think it's really fun to think about that last arrived framework for creating a UI. So this will actually be possible for use to have a Twitter scale from day one. Don't we find that to be fun? Or to use this new database that makes the CAP theorem to go away. That's not, we don't have to think about it any longer. Or what else? Kubernetes, let's get that going, absolutely. We have all those ideas, not to think about programming languages. We really have that to be settled before we think about anything else. So, lots of different examples, and I think all of them are wrong all of them are wrong, basically. So it's very much about doing lots of activities in your own little vacuum. You're doing stuff, but you're not getting anywhere. It's like having an exercise bike. It's quite nice, actually. You won't get rain on you, no wind, no slopes, but you're not going anywhere at all. So it's more about being busy than doing business. So I think we are having a mindset problem here and a gap. So the question is, how can we create great togetherness to succeed, because when we are running in full speed together in a good way, we are kind of impossible to stop. We will be able to create great stuff. So that's what the first 4 of those ideas. So let's discuss what really matters. Maybe some of you recognize those fellows still, or yeah, great. Do you know the movie? With Holy Grail, yeah. Some of you might know this story because it's been in one of the good books. But let's have it as a repetition because I think this is important for my presentation. So John Cleese told a story in an interview about when they were shooting the Holy Grail. And they came to one certain scene one evening, and they did it over and over again, but it didn't turn out really well. They didn't feel this was it. So they went back to the storyboard and thought about it for a few minutes and totally changed the idea about the scene. Then they went in front of the camera again, had a try, and it was really good at first try. So they called it a night and left. A couple of weeks later, and they are looking at the movie, the full movie, and they laugh more or less all the time. But then they come to this scene again. And it's actually not fun. They feel a little bit bad, and some of them are feeling depressed. And we can't have this scene in the movie, they say. But then they realize, actually, this is not the right version. What happened to the right version? They ask the editor. And the editor tells them, I'm sorry, that version you are referring to, it was spoiled, so we couldn't use it. And they all found that to be really sad. But they asked the editor, could we have a look at it anyway? And the editor showed it to them. And it was hilarious. They were laughing like crazy, almost crying. It was such a fun scene. And then they asked the editor, well, why couldn't we use this? Well, it's totally spoiled the editors. And nobody else understood what he meant. So they asked him to show. And then he said, well, have a look here. I'm going to show it in slow motion. And at this frame here, there's a shadow, 3 pixels or whatever it's called. Down in the corner here, there is a shadow. Someone is probably showing a knee in front of the camera. Spoiled. And I think what happened there was that the editor, he wouldn't like the idea of being joked about from all the editors in the world, because having used a technical, not perfect scene. But on the other hand, that doesn't matter too much in a comedy compared to what is really important. It should be. Of course, it's obvious. Still, again, I think we as developers are often forgetting about that. We don't, oh, I have this piece of code, it's almost perfectly beautiful, only partly beautiful right now. We can't possibly ship this. But maybe it's actually creating lots of value for the business. We might run into this situation, we too. So, what to start with? I'm going on a trip. I'm thinking about using a boat, a plane, or a car. What shall I pick? I could say it depends, and that's kind of the right answer, I guess. But if I'm going over to the neighbor, I don't need any of this, especially not if we are having wine on a Friday evening. So that would not be possible to choose any of those. The same is if the target is going to Mars. I don't probably need any of those either. So what we have to start with, in my opinion, is we have to start with purpose. Of course. It's quite obvious when you think about it, I think. And this is the first little part for bridging the gap here. It's not solving it all, but it's the first step. We'll come back to more ideas here, what we need to do. So if you go back at Monday to your colleagues at the office and say, we should start with purpose. Then they might say, that sounds like a good idea. What's the purpose? And actually, this is the sad thing about this. Most people haven't thought about this at all. Much less, that even goes for top-level management, I would say. Where everybody knows the purpose. And then they don't tell. Because maybe they haven't thought about it enough. I don't know. But more often than not, that's what I find out. Others would tell you that purpose stuff, that's rubbish. Don't think about it. What a lousy idea. Of course, we need to make money. That's what it's all about. And in my opinion, that's kind of a misconception, a little bit unfortunate one, because making money, well, we need to put food on the table, so that's fine. But it's not something that really motivates us day after day after day. Instead, compare that to today I'm going to do something for curing cancer. That's really cool, I think, if that's something that gets you going. And the cool thing is that if you really align on the purpose in the whole company, you will make more money than you did before. So it's not one or the other. They go perfectly well hand in hand. Something like 30 years ago, I had this choice in my life in Sweden. It was mandatory to do military service. So I could either pick jail or do the stuff. And I thought for it for a long time, actually. I thought about it. But I finally decided to do military services. And it turned out to be much worse than I could ever have expected. So all of a sudden, I go from my first job as a developer, and I find people scream at me all the time, and they scream like they are spitting at me, and it was horrible. 25 years later, I read up on military theory, and I found out that 150 years ago, the militaries knew how to do microservices in a good way. Isn't that totally crazy? And then I realized what the militaries tried to do with me as a young soldier. They only tried to make me a well-behaving microservice or participant in a microservice architecture. If I only knew, I would have forgiven them immediately, but I didn't understand. So when they 150 years ago, when some militaries found out how to organize in a really dynamic setting, war is really tricky, because if you try to make plans for it and start it from the top, and all of a sudden there is no hill any longer. Someone there was a bomb on that hill. Then most often you can't go back to the general and ask, what? Because that's too slow nowadays. That's the same in the business. We have to be fast. Those who have the information about the hill, of course they should be able to decide also. They know. Those who know should do, I think. But you can't have that autonomy if not all your microservices is looking in the right direction, so to say. You have to align on purpose to be able to use autonomy. Does that make sense? And that's very much what they talked about in that book I read. So, okay, we have decided purpose is a good starting point. Let's continue from there. The second one, what's the context we are living in, typically? And the bridge, I started out with the purpose. It's actually not strong enough yet. So I think I've done that mistake a lot of times in my career. I only tell people to, we have two people or two departments struggle a little bit with their relationship. And I tell my colleague, just go over there and talk to them, and that will solve it all. They never try, typically. And probably we didn't have the setting for it yet. There is much more to be taken care of for it to really work out, I think. So the next thing we are doing now with this bridge, we are building some pillars here that will help us out to build a really strong bridge that will work out not just on a sunny day for very light people, but every day, even for someone like me. So, what's the context? I think in this room, this is a quite simple answer for you, because all of you are domain-driven design skilled people, and, well, the business for you, or the overall context is the business. I think actually the book could even be called Business-Driven Design. That would have worked out. So this is easy. Out in the wild, people are forgetting about this all the time. Not just the context, but also focusing on the outcome of the context. So I think that was the reason or a problem for all those initial 4 stories. They were doing their stuff from a skill perspective, but not thinking about how will this actually help the business I'm in, and how will this help the outcome to be created. And of course, as DDDers, we're thinking much more about this, and splitting up the business in subdomains and bounded context and things like that, which has been spoken about a lot during those 2 days here. So, we are going now to do a really amazing thing here. We are going on an amazing adventure. Then something strange happens when that is discussed with some people, I think. It's not Jimmy carrying a beer, by the way. It's a sunblocker. Because as you realize, this lamp here will make me be really red this evening. I have very sensitive skin. So going on a trip might be a good idea to have sunscreen. And that's probably necessary, but it's not taking us anywhere at all. We are not moving one single step on that trip of ours. So this is not what I would call being offensive on that trip plan. And this comes back to business development, I think. We could choose our business development style to be offensive or defensive. And it's basically what's going on in soccer. We could put all the players in the goal and protect ourselves, or we could go trying to make a goal. Which is correct? Shall you defend yourself? Well, we have to do both, of course. Which is so obvious when it comes to soccer, but when it comes to business, I don't see a good balance. Quite often there is a misbalance, I would say. First of all we have the defensive way of approaching business development. It's quite a lot about compliance and taking care of risks, and it's very much about cost focus. Very much about that. The second way of being more offensive, then it's about growing the market, finding new markets. Then it's much more revenue focused. And if I have to pick only one of those, I think the last one is much more fun. It's not being sloppy with costs, not at all. But if the revenue increases by 10 times, the cost isn't that important, actually. So there is so much possibility in the second one. But again, of course, both are needed. We can't just pick one of them. We need to have some balance. But what I quite often see is that maybe the IT department says, well, let's think about the offensive side in 5 years from now. First, we have to have the compliance in place and da-da-da-da-da. And the competition is running over us. So we can't do it like that. It's a little bit like being driven by fear or being driven by excitement, and that might be really provocative to say. So we can do ourselves a favor and organizing for outcome if we find that to be important instead of organizing for activities. This is a common way of creating an organization. So this is about organizing for specialities. We have a department that is maybe the marketing department. Then we have a department that is the construction, development department, testing department. And when there is something, a new outcome to be created, we have to pass through all those departments. There are a couple of different problems with this. One problem is that all the friction in this picture will be at the arrows. So when something is being created by marketing and tossed over the fence to the next team will hate it, and there will be lots of discussions about that. And that goes on and on and on. And there is typically not a lot of feedback flowing all the way back. We're also quite far away from the customers who want to have the result or the outcome. And their feedback is typically not going quickly back all the way either. And the third problem, we will typically see lots of local optimizations, such as a typical example is the IT department being measured on the number of open tickets, problem tickets. What happens then? Well, they get a bonus if they have very few. They will typically refuse to take, they might have a form with 11 pages for a problem ticket. On page 8, you have forgotten one field. They just give the form back. And they have solved their problem. They have a good situation for getting bonus. But the overall optimization isn't happening. A different way of organizing would be to try to do something like this. So we have, instead of having speciality-focused departments, we go for more business-focused. Cross-functional people are together trying to create the outcome. They are getting much closer to the outcome. Of course, they have a direct contact, all of them, with what's happening with the customer. Do they like it or not? And they don't have to have all those typically very slow handovers, because all we need are in the same room. We can be very, very fast. And as has been said here during those 2 days, time to market is much more important now than ever. That's a strong differentiator between success or failure. So if we try the second one, it might work out perfectly well. Everybody are happy until the CFO. Any CFOs in here, by the way? No? When the CFO see that, he might or she might react and say, I think there is duplication going on here. You are doing similar things there and here. We are having scarce resources being duplicated. That's bad. And they push back to the other side immediately or very quickly. Look out for that, or expect it. I've seen it happen a lot of times. The strange thing, I asked one of those CFOs one time, how would you deal with a crisis situation? And then he says, well, that's very easy. Just put all the people you really need in the room, lock the door, and tell them they can come out when they fix the problem. And so that's what he kind of automatically thinks that's a good idea. Still, when he looks at what he believes is expensive, he likes the other model. Quite strange. Okay, another gap we are seeing all the time is this one, I think. Quite often, managers seem to think quite a lot about money, and developers seem to think a lot about the code, and they are miles apart. But I don't think they are too different. We create the code for creating value. Value is most often measured in money, so kind of quite close connection between money and code, actually. That's one thing. The other thing, I often use a model saying that to maintain a piece of code, the cost increase if the code base is larger. Would you agree? Is that okay with you? Yeah? And this is one of those models. I usually say that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And I know that all developers in here could tear this model down immediately, saying, okay, so you say that 1 million lines of code is more expensive to maintain than 10,000 lines. Well, I can write very long lines, Jimmy. That's a typical engineer comment on this. But that's not what I'm after. This is actually helping you as developers. When the managers start to realize this, so you are saying that one line of code will cost me €1 per year until this system is killed? That sounds like the code is quite important, the manager would say. Isn't that amazing? all of a sudden, that manager will start asking you questions like, have you deleted some code today? And it's totally, you wouldn't believe it. Try it and see if it works for you. So to be honest, this model, I'm just told you, is bridging the gap, but I think managers likes it much more than most developers. But see it as your friend also, because that will drive the managers in the right direction. They will start taking the decisions that you agree on. Because, to me, size matters tremendously when it comes to code bases. I think that's very, very important. Not the perfect model again, but it kind of points in the right direction quite often. And what happens when you have a code base that is growing, you will see higher cost for maintaining it, you will see more bugs, and you will see more delays. Really big code bases more keen to have those properties. And all of a sudden, something terrible will happen when the code base is growing. Do you know what that is? Sorry? Technical, but absolutely. Yeah. But something happens now. Someone really brilliant will say, we need to hire more people into this team. Unfortunately, that in its turn will lead to something. You all know it. More code. Isn't this horrible? So we are in this vicious circle. We are just on the path to hell, I was saying. That was maybe a bit harsh, but it might look like this after a while. So this code base was not created by 3 developers. It was, at the time we started working on it, there were like 25 developers. And it was really frustrating for the product owner and the business people because they pushed a lot of energy into this project and the developers were working like crazy, but nothing came out. Nothing. You might think that's a dependency graph. That's not for classes. That's not the case. It's a dependency graph for assemblies, just to scare you off. You won't sleep tonight. I will get really angry emails from your partners. Never again I will let him or her listen to you, Jimmy. So no, that's that it's not around any longer, so you can just relax. It has been taken care of now. So, third idea, we have had purpose, and we, of course, live in the world of the business. Question now is, how can we work together in a good way? And we are still building on the bridge for making it better and stronger. And we can't just, that's an engineering, just trust this is a good idea for the bridge. The next the next idea is that we should focus on the language as a good thing. How many of you are working with domain experts, but they every now and then tell you they don't have time for you? Have you ever heard that? That's a common thing. I always get a little bit suspicious when I hear it. Of course, they are stressed from time to time. But when you see a trend that they have less and less time for you, then you should get a little bit worried. Because it might be 2 different reasons for that, I think. One reason might be that they don't think the project you are working on together is important. And then it's just time to leave. You can't possibly succeed with a domain expert who doesn't care about it. Something else is more important. You should try to get on board on that instead. And the other reason, and this is really irritating, I know, but I've been doing this myself, of course, so I'm as guilty as anyone else. But the other reason is that we kind of bore the domain experts, I would say. They don't find us too fun to hang out with. So, actually, I have a little story here. And this is about me being in Kitzbühel with my family, or most of my family, my wife and my youngest son, a couple of years ago. And we were standing in a ski lift. Just 2 days ago, I told this story in Sydney. It didn't work out perfectly. In a room like this, nobody knew about Kitzbühel. Could you imagine? And that's really stupid of me, of course. I should have changed the story into surfing or something like that. Anyway, so we are standing waiting for our turn in the queue, or in the area, and we are standing next to each other, preparing for this 4-seater. And all of a sudden, there is a very small boy skiing over to us, and he's standing next to my wife, and he's preparing for going into the lift with us. And my wife is not perfectly okay with that, because Swedes in Austria kidnapping a boy, is that a good idea? Probably not. It's not a good idea anywhere in the world, of course. But she also hears his ski teacher scream at him all the time, and saying something like this: "Achtung, Achtung, bleib in der Gruppe." Was that okay? Huh? Where? I'm going to buy one of those lotteries tonight. So we realized that he's not supposed to be with us, and my wife actually, she's not violent normally, but she starts to do this and kick him and almost by violence force him over. But then he turns to us and says, "Jag vill åka med er." And this is Swedish, meaning, I want to go with you. So what happened in that lift queue was that he heard us speak Swedish, and he knew Swedish, and he could go with us up to the target. And he told us, he talked like this the whole time, and he told us, "Oh, every summer I'm in Sweden and with my grandmother, and that's lovely." And I think that was Microsoft Auto Up. Really? Okay. So I found that to be almost too powerful. We shared language with this little boy, and that was the whole thing, everything we did, and he liked us. Isn't that almost scary? We could easily kidnap him if we wanted. I can assure you. We didn't, but this story, we can take that back to our domain experts. So when we go into the domain expert today, we are going to tell them the truth, or whatever we are expecting to do in that conversation. And we start telling them about dependencies and dependency injection, repositories, and a little bit about higher order functions. We can say one of those words and they get blank. Have you seen that? It's like a curtain. And they, "Oh, I'm very sorry," they tell you, and I have to. Sorry, doesn't work. We can't do that. When we go in there, we should try to talk about what they care about. It's quite easy. They forgive us for doing mistakes. We can tell them mostly anything, and they just find it to be fun if we try. "Oh, is it true that we will increase profit if we do this?" And they will say, "Oh, no, but..." And then they will tell you, and you start learning, and that's so powerful. They want to hang out with you. They will never tell you they don't have time with you. They will tell you, "I actually have a board meeting, but I will tell them to cancel and talk to you." That's what's going to happen. Maybe not, but something like that. And when you go to the pub in the evening, you find them hang around after you all the time. Almost a little bit scary. But it's not scary. It's super. It's really fun. Because especially if those are those domain experts that are really super, best in the world in their field, and not just be able to do the job, they are also able to build a machine for doing the job. Those you want to hang out with. And those relationships you should be really careful about, because that will, for one thing, be super fun for you and energizing and everything, and the result will be tremendous sooner or later. So working with the domain experts and focusing on the language, the ubiquitous language, as you know, that's not about just listening to what they are saying. We have the responsibility of trying to evolve that language together. When we describe our understanding in the language, they will automatically find problems in that. It takes a second, and they say, "Well, we would not say it like that." And the same for you. When they start talking the language, and they start using the same word for different things, you should immediately snap that and say, well, that's not very crisp. Could we please try to evolve the language here and only use one word? And that will work out very well. And that will help your success tremendously. So, we are so lucky, all of us in here, because we are using the best building material in the world. We are creating software by just writing words. Isn't that amazing? So if we build something and we are not totally happy with it, we just delete it back to the starting point and try again and try again. Tell a carpenter about that, and he will freak out and he will immediately become a developer. I think that's going to happen. So software is magic. We wanted to do something else, just change a word, and it's going to do something else. Totally perfect. Unfortunately, this is not too common, because this is what most people in the world think about software. Not just you in here, much more the business people and those not too much into this field. They have learned over the years that making change to a piece of software becomes tremendously expensive over time. Have you seen a piece of software having this curve? If you need to make a change, it will cost like all the money in the world. So you kind of shy away a little bit from that. And perhaps you have this idea of, let's start from the beginning, and this time everything should be perfect. Let's think for 2 years and do it. That's a sure way of making a failure, I would say. Never seen that work out. So we don't want this curve. We want to have something like this instead. What are you doing to create that curve? Any ideas? Refactoring. Tests. More. Sorry? Monitoring. Finally, someone said DDD. I was almost leaving here. DDD is one thing, and all the rest, I can't say which is most important, because it's like a holistic view. So many different things you have to have here. Definitely DDD, in my opinion. So let's assume you are starting to really create this great relationship with your domain expert that you really like and want to work with. And then you are talking it all the time. But then you say, well, end of session, now I'm hitting the keyboard. And you start IntelliJ or Visual Studio or whatever. I'm not sure we need to do that as quickly and as often as we currently are, actually. Because I really like this idea that was created 25 years ago by Martin P. Ward. It's called language-oriented programming. So instead of solving all problems in C# or in Java, maybe it's sometimes quite a good idea to create another language that is much more focused on the domain expert for taking care of some of the problems. I've been trying this for like 10 years now, and it's not working out perfectly all the times. But when it works, wow, it's taking it to the next level. Both the collaboration, but the overall result also, I would say. So you should try this out. It's amazing, actually. Anyone tried language-oriented? Yeah. One hand, yeah. This is what I talked about before in the early days of DDD. I asked people, do you know about DDD? And nobody raised a hand. And then finally I find one, and that's Eric. Okay. So that's how it was. Now it was this again 10 years later. Let's see each other in 10 years from now, 15 maybe. And we will all, we'll see. Maybe that's wrong. I've been wrong a couple of times in my life, I can assure you. Fourth idea, how shall we direct energy correctly? What to focus on? Or how to organize ourselves? I think of this as using the circle of safety in many different respects. And that's the next step for actually finishing our bridge, for bridging the gaps now. And the idea here is that If we are, especially in a big company, you might have seen this, we have this idea of starting up something new, a new initiative. And we do that very high on energy and everything. And typically we have a couple of successes early on. All of a sudden, that big organization, its immune system is started off. And it goes and finds us, and we're not fulfilling the status quo. We are doing new stuff. And it tries to kill us. Have you seen that? Really hard to do something totally new in a big organization with a strong culture. The organization has to defend itself against it. So for that to work out, I propose to build really high walls around that new initiative. Actually, it's even better to just hide it somewhere, move it to a different city, so it's not being able to be reached from the rest of the organization. This might sound a bit blunt, but I've seen it so many times. So this seems to be something like a law of nature or something. If you want to have good neighbors, you should have good fences, it said, and it's a little bit of this. I'm not sure, I don't think this is totally new to you, because you're thinking along those lines all the time. Bounded context, for example, is a good example here. We are very careful with the border around our context. And don't come here and touch my stuff without permission, we say, or I will give you a little handle, you can't come over here. So that's one thing. Another thing, even if we are doing that and we are working together very closely day after day, we have this, we have inherited a little problem from our ancestors back in the day. Because a couple of thousand years ago, life was kind of dangerous, more dangerous than now. So when our ancestors heard a sound, there was a little click here, did you hear it? If they had heard that back in the days, the correct response would be to run. And all of you are from those people. Because those that weren't afraid, those that were curious, oh, that's a strange sound, let me check it out. Lion, and they were gone. So it seemed to be a better idea to be a bit careful. Unfortunately, that is kind of tricking us now. Nowadays, a strange sound is typically not too dangerous. You can be okay with that. But our brains don't understand this. And this is killing us actually every day, or might be. So when you go to the office and your colleague is not saying hi when you arrive, and then you start thinking, this is not a good idea in my life. Is he trying to kill me now? Probably not. The next day, he's not saying hi and he's not smiling. You're sure he's going to kill you. And all of a sudden, all the energy is wasted on thinking about stuff that doesn't at all relate to the outcome. All the energy is going on here in different strange, wasted situations, I would say. So it's quite important to think about, not just to try to not be sad when someone says something to you. You can also help out and think about how you behave at the office. Of course, you should laugh and smile every day and tell people how much you love them and things. And that will help a lot. I have another idea here, a little tip for how to communicate at the office. And the idea is to not just communicate in one dimension. It's like let's assume a business meeting here, 10 people, and I tell you, I can see that you're watching your phone all the time. And then I talk to the other people, and what happened then is you probably didn't think that was a good idea because you didn't look at your phone, and the rest in the room, they will start thinking, what's wrong with Jimmy? He's typically quite smooth, and nobody hears what we are talking about any longer. All energy is about my miscommunication here. On the other hand, if I'd used this little idea of speaking in 4 dimensions, I would say, I can see that you are looking at your phone. That makes me think that you don't want to be in this project. And that That makes me really nervous because I really want you here. Did you see the difference? A little bit nicer, the second one? Or maybe scary? I don't know. But you get used to that style immediately, and we will have quality discussions instead of skipping the discussions, what would typically happen otherwise. And I think this works out like a charm, actually. The only problem is I tend to forget, but when I had a troublesome discussion, I can always try it out again, and you always have a second chance. Yet one thing that goes in the area of the circle of safety is that you want to have an environment where it's fine to fail. It shouldn't be like that. Anyway. So a couple of years ago, I went to a big car manufacturer in Sweden, and I told them, we discussed a new project coming up, and I was very proud and told them, I'm Jimmy. I think I have the world record of mistakes. And I thought that was a cool thing to say, and they hated it. They opened the door and pointed. Actually, not exactly, but they found it to be, that was the stupidest thing we've ever heard. We don't do mistakes here. They actually said that. And then just the other day, I found this really nice German saying. Maybe it's, have you heard it before? I have never heard it, and it makes perfect sense to me. I guess it goes like, if you work a lot, you do mistakes. And if you work little, you do fewer mistakes. And if you don't do any mistakes, you probably, you're not helping out. And I think actually that was the problem at that company. I'm not going to tell you which company it was, by the way. So, I'm not going to tell you which company it was. Of course, it was not the whole company. It was one single person that thought in that way. So I have a friend who runs a museum of failure. Have you seen that? The irony here is that this museum of failure, it has become a huge success. Isn't that really weird? So, for example, he has on that museum the Pringle, fat-free Pringle. Isn't that a really bad idea? But they actually tried it out, and all of those ideas, I think we can kind of have a tendency of not remembering it too long. I'm sure they were really sad at the time, finding out it was a failure, but life goes on. I think it would be a nice idea to try out at every office to have a little museum where you celebrate your failures. Not as warning, but more like, wow, we tried that, that was really crazy. But a couple of tries later, we came up with this amazing success. If we only tried one thing, we wouldn't have had that success. So I think that's what it says. 10 years ago, I wrote an article with probably the worst name ever. It was called Chunk Cloud Computing. Eric told me not to. I remember. I hope he has forgotten about this. But the idea was basically that to protect collaboration, we need to be very strong about the borders and make them physical, kind of. And I think that was something like microservices. When James Lewis and Fowler wrote the microservices paper, they referenced this article and many others. But my reason for showing it here is that, in my opinion, microservices wasn't a technical thing from the beginning. It was, in my opinion, much more about protecting collaboration. Those who thought it was a technical thing, they were wrong. Was that provocative enough? You seem to take everything. No, of course, that's opinionated, but I strongly believe this, and it perhaps because I'm coming from a DDD world. So now we have this bridge. Next and final question is what to use it for. Okay, we can run over to the other people, but why? We need to do something. And please notice, it's not just us running. If we as a developer run over to the managers, tomorrow they will come running over to us. It works in both directions. It's very easy. It's very automatic. But we need something to do here. And I think the answer and the last idea is trying to solve bottlenecks, and especially do it in the core domain. But first, just a quick mention about the extreme automation. And if you think about who's the fastest developer in the world, it doesn't matter if that person is put in a contest to a program. If it's a repetitive task, the program wins all the time. So we should use automation everywhere where it makes sense, so to say. That's not to say that all people should stop having a job, not at all. But we should use people for the tricky stuff, which is, at least for now, hard for computers. For example, the creative things and for relationship-based things. And people are so much nicer to hang out with compared to the computer. Have you tried to do this? It's not so nice. So let's see if this changes, but for now that's the case. And then we use automation for the boring stuff and protect people from getting sick out of it. But finally, bottlenecks. To developers, I think it comes quite natural. You have learned that from experience of doing optimizations. Where shall I put my energy? Well, let's find the performance bottleneck and work on that. Instead of trying to, for example, delete all comments in the code base, everywhere won't help at all, as you know. So, but over and over again, this is tricky out there in the wild. Business people we need to help them out, I think. Quite often they might do something like this. I'm trying to show a pipeline here, putting in effort at the left, and there is outcome at the right. So maybe someone might think, let's do more here. Doesn't help. Not at all. It's actually negative because we are just building a queue and it's expensive. And of course, putting the effort in was expensive too. So we are wasting money here. Others might think, well, let's put more people at the right to take care of what comes out. Doesn't help either. Not at all. So, of course, what we should do is to widen the bottleneck and try to find it and try to solve it out. Reason for this, those mistakes, I think it's quite often heard that, well, let's do this initiative because it affects so many. Well, that's a nice thought. It won't help your outcome at all because the bottleneck is still there. That's exactly what we were showing here, actually. Or Google is doing it, let's do that. Not such a good idea, typically I would say either. Google are Google, and you are you. So you should do what you need, your company needs. Or, the loud people might get their ways through. But the reason for trying to solve the bottlenecks is this. You only spend X, and you get the effect of 10 times at least as much. And that's amazing. All of a sudden, the CFO even might start to like you a little bit. I don't know. Okay, so what really matters? Start with the purpose. The business is the context. Focus on language. Use the circle of safety and solve bottlenecks. Those were my ideas for what really matters. What happens now is not just that we succeed with our project. Those 4 situations we started out with, all of a sudden they are smiling. Can you see? They find it to be much more fun also. They don't have to work only on their specialization. They like hanging out with us and working together because they will see the effect and the outcome, and everything becomes much more fun. So I have a dream. Going to Mars. Wouldn't that be cool? If I could get back at least. No, my dream is this. I'd like to have this as the normal, what we talked about here. This shall not be strange or anything. It should be, of course, all of those things made sense. Why shouldn't it be the normal? So I think we can help out with this. So it's time for us to actually, at least I'm going to try to be my dream. And if you share this, please help out. That was my presentation and time for weekend. Thank you very much for listening.